Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of the movie like the script. I'm one of the hosts, Bob Rose. I'm at Thundergrunt Bob on all the relevant social media sites. And right now, Jimmy's going to introduce himself.
I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant. My Twitter handle for doing that is at Jimmy R. George, and my threads is at _Jimmy George.
And I am Jamie Nash. I am a screenwriter. I wrote the book Save the Cat Race for TV and the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook. You can buy both on Amazon right now, this second. Go do it. And my Twitter handle is Jamie_Nash.
And today we're going to talk about Halloween. Now, is it Halloween 2018? Is it Halloween 2007? No, we're going to talk about 1978. I just said to the guys, it feels like we have done this movie, but we absolutely have not. We've only done 2018. So we're going to have to do 2007 at some point to complete the trilogy.
Oh, the trifecta.
We got to complete the trilogy. No, but we're going to talk about 1978 today. And before we get into our talking points, we're going to go around and just say a little bit about our personal experience with the movie. Who wants to start? Huh? How about Jamie?
Okay.
Or Loomis, as your name on here says.
Dr. Loomis. So this movie, it's funny because now we've kind of done is it the Holy Trilogy of horror movies for me? Coming, though there was really 4, so it's quadrilogy or something. So when I was a kid, there were 4 real horror movies that influenced me the most. And when I say when I was a kid, I mean pre-10 kid. And the 4 movies that influenced me the most were, we've already done most of them: The Exorcist, Alien, Jaws, and Halloween. So we finally got into the 4th one.
After this, Jamie's done. There's nothing left to say.
I mean, we could do like Abbott and Costello,
Meet
the Wolfman, or Frankenstein, or whatever.
All right.
I watch those all the time too. But then after that, we're pretty much done. So they were the 4 horror movies that really hit me when I was really, really young, that introduced me to horror. And the weird thing about the other 3, I was almost too scared to watch them till I was an adult, almost. Not an adult, till I was a teenager. I was like 12 or 13. You know, that's adult back in the 80s. You were an adult when you were 13. So those other movies I didn't see for a while afterwards. But Halloween, I think, was my first real horror movie that I watched. And the way I watched it was on a like black and white TV in my room with like another friend, and it had rabbit ears, and it used to come on like VHF. You know, I used to have to watch Channel 54 or something like that.
What size was the TV? Just out of curiosity.
It was not very big. It was it was probably as big as my laptop that I'm looking at right now. You know,
that's not too bad actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it was bigger than it was not a bad size. It was like a hand-me-down black and white TV that was in my room, and I watched it. And I watched this. They showed it a lot on television back then. I'm not sure what year this was, 80, 81. I could probably look it up. But they showed it a lot on television, and I would watch it in bits and pieces and the whole way through and stuff like that. So it really was the first horror movie that I kind of was able to digest. And a weird sort of thing, I was scared to watch Alien and Exorcist and stuff. Halloween was very scary to me and the scariest movie I've ever seen. But somehow you could tolerate it. It wasn't particularly gory. It almost felt like, I know it isn't, but it almost felt like it could be a PG movie or something like that in a weird sort of way. So I watched it, and I remember the other big thing about Halloween for me. This is about all I have to say about it, except it was my first horror movie. The other big thing was, I remember somehow I got a hold of the Halloween 2 novelization. And that was like, before I even saw Halloween, I read the novelization over and over and over again of Halloween 2. And then I think I saw the movie there shortly after, around the same time. I don't know what that means. There were a lot of books when I was a kid, horror books. Like I had I think I talked about it in the Alien podcast. I had the Alien graphic novel. I had the Halloween 2 novelization. I think I read The Exorcist, the book, things like that. I would work my way up to the movies by reading about them first. And I'd read and read and read, and then I'd watch the movie. And it made it, I don't know, somehow it made it
You
more
came in
tolerable.
prepared, dude.
Yeah, I was less
Yeah.
scared. I was less scared
Yeah.
to watch it. So anyway, that's my Halloween
Cool.
stuff.
Jimmy?
So yeah, Michael Myers is definitely my favorite slasher villain. So I'm excited to talk about this one as opposed to 2018, even though, you know, I enjoy 2018 for what it is, and we talk about that in a whole other episode.
Yeah, let's not bring that up. I don't want to relive it.
But yeah, I know, and I never even saw the other two.
I did.
But
I saw the second one.
I remember I saw this when I was like, so I grew up in Virginia Beach, and while my parents didn't shelter me from horror, I definitely was seeing rated R stuff at an early age, like 7, 8. My parents didn't care. My dad was not a horror guy, so we didn't have anything around the house, and he was never renting things that were horror centric. So it wasn't until I moved to Baltimore when I was 11, and the kids I befriended, their parents loved horror, and they had all these shitty VHS everywhere with movies we shouldn't be watching, and we do sleepovers, and that's when I got introduced to, you know, the Evil Deads, the Creep Shows. Specifically, Creep Show 2 is one of the first horror movies I ever saw, and this was one of them. And I remember I was getting flashbacks last night when I watched my Dean Cundy supervised 4K restoration, and all the darks and the blacks are so crisp and beautiful and easy to see. I got flashbacks of like, I must have watched it on like a dub of a dub of a dub, and I remember I could barely see anything. Like Jamie said, he's watching it on probably like a 13-inch black and white TV.
Like when his face appears in the closet, you probably couldn't even see. What is she saying? Right?
Yeah, which I remember the opening, the second prologue, which we're going to talk about, the second cold open, when the inmates are wandering around. I remember not being able to see and like leaning in close to the screen, like, what is happening? I don't even see, like, and when the guy's jumping on the roof, I couldn't really see and that actually added to the ambiance and the vibe. The fact that like I had to like move in close to see what the hell this third generation VHS was showing me. Like, I don't know. I'd love to see experience what that is like now as an adult. But anyway, it left an impression on me, definitely. And I don't know, there's something about the shape that just still to this day creeps me out, even if the movies itself aren't creeping me out. He creeps me out and sticks with me. And I think we're going to go into like some of that, like the realism fact of it, you know, I think has something to do with it as opposed to like a Freddy Krueger. But yeah, there's my Halloween.
Cool.
I love this movie. That's
I was going to say like just a little bit. I think my role in this podcast is kind of audience surrogate. I also, I think at this point in this podcast's history, I could say like I'm kind of also a horror surrogate guy in the, like, as far as like every time we talk about these old movies, what do I always say? I came into it late, or I came into it through comedy. This one I came into late. And I didn't see it at a formative age. I think I saw it in maybe like around the 1999, something like that.
Whoa. Okay.
Right. Like Mike Myers, I think I saw 4 in the early 90s through the return of Michael Myers, but I don't have like a really childhood history with this at all. And I do think it's a beautifully shot movie. I think it's a classic. It's obviously, not denying any of the great things about it. It doesn't even break the top 5 of my Carpenter list. If I'm honest, everyone can write emails telling why is Bob on this podcast, you know, but that's the truth. I think it's a great movie. I understand why it has its place in horror history, film history, everything. I do love it as for its craftsmanship. It's not the one I go to with Carpenter. It just isn't. And Michael Myers, not to say the opposite of you, Jimmy, not even remotely my favorite '80s horror guy. So yeah, I have like a loose relationship with Halloween. I always have. I've seen all the movies. I love the franchise. I think this is a great movie. I'm just not as head over heels, I think, as the rest of the horror community is.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it. You know, being stark honesty. Do you appreciate it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's weirdly enough, like when I was rewatching it, it's one of the few, you know me, I don't rewatch a ton.
Yeah.
I'm not a rewatcher. This is a movie I rewatch every couple years. And if pressed, I might say it's my favorite horror movie.
Hey,
damn.
It'd be hard for me not to say
love
like
it.
Evil Dead 2 or Evil Dead or something.
Which we haven't done on the show yet. We're gonna get there.
You get a different reaction from me from Evil Dead 2. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's and maybe it was because it was my first horror movie and something about that. But even rewatching it, and just the simplicity of it in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And there are some things we'll talk about later on that I think rewatching it, like I'm like, why is this my favorite? Is it just because it hit me at the right time? But there's some things in it that I think really are unique. So
yeah,
we'll talk about those as we go.
Can I also say, like, I saw when 2018 came out, I saw a double feature. They showed 1978, then 2018, and I'll say this: watching on the big screen, it did change my love. It made my love for it grow a lot.
Oh wow!
Like just seeing it at the Senator, you know, I was like right in the middle, dead center, up close, just being totally engulfed by it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it definitely made me love it more than I ever had. So I've been a bigger fan of it since 2018. So 2018 did something right, I guess, by having that happen. So yeah. Jamie, who wrote this shit?
Yeah, well, John Carpenter and Debra Hill wrote it. And I read a book, I think it's called Taking Shape, a couple years ago. And I'm going to try to remember
it's a great title.
Bit about. Yeah. And it was basically about the whole franchise. It was a really good book, but it spans the whole franchise up to that point. Like it was before the recent 3 movies. So if I remember right, who's the guy? Now I can't remember the producers. There's 2 of them. Yablans, is that the guy's name? And
I can look it up.
And Mustafa Akid or whatever. But I think if I'm
David
pronouncing
gets
these
stuck
names,
with the mispronunciation.
Really hard.
I'm not
names.
sure. I've never tried to pronounce either one of these names before. So it was the producer's idea, and then he hired Carpenter it was called The Babysitter Murders at the time. He hired Carpenter and Debra Hill to write and produce and direct it. I think Carpenter insisted Debra Hill's girlfriend at the time co-write and produce it.
Jamie, it's Mustafa Akkad and Erwin Yablans.
Yes. Yeah. Mustafa Akkad, the weird thing about him was, I remember early in my screenwriting days, he would pop up like on Inktip and stuff a lot. He was still doing it. You know, he was like, if you got a horror script, he was still producing.
That's really cool.
I think I might have had a run in with him, in a good way or 2 early on. So anyway, so they had The Babysitter Murders. They hired them to make it. And that was it. It was like, do a movie about babysitter murders. Carpenter went off to make a TV movie. I think Someone to Watch Over Me or something like that. Now I should have looked this stuff up. But he went off to make a TV movie that was kind of had some creepy, stalkery kind of stuff. And Debra Hill wrote the first draft with Carpenter's input. And when they handed it in, this is the interesting part. This is what I'm leading to, is the producer was the one that said, why don't you set it on Halloween? And here's the really weird part, like that always fascinated me. Apparently the first draft was set over multiple nights. So he was like, it'd be much more tense if this was one day, 24 hours.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And then he said, and Halloween, because surprisingly, nobody had done a movie called Halloween before. So that actually came from the producer. So sometimes producers give good notes. So, sometimes not the studio. A producer.
So did they retroactively input Halloween into the mythos from that point?
Yeah, I think so. I think they just rewrote it and like set the thing at Halloween and that night and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because a lot of my horror scripts, I almost have a problem with this in some ways. I mean, it's not a problem per se, but my genuine instinct is always to set my horror movies over one night. Like I have a really hard time writing horror that's stretched out over multiple
That's the
nights.
house, right? You got one night time for
Yeah, and the trap. Yeah.
The trap is
Yeah.
one night, right?
And there are some good Nightmare on Elm Street things like that stretch over multiple nights. It's not in me to do it. Like my first instinct is always one night. And whenever even when I give notes on horror, a lot of times, if I see somebody that writes something stretched over like a week or a month, I'm like, one night, change it to one night. It's just my instinct is like, that's the way you get the most tension. And it probably comes from Halloween and Halloween 2 and, these movies that affected me so much when I was a kid. Clerks. There you go. There you go.
He originally died at the end. Right?
That's right. He did. He did. So the box office of Halloween, it basically only had a domestic listed because I think foreign probably came much later. It was a different time back then. So $47 million. It finishes 10th in the 1978 box office. And when I look at this, my favorite thing to do is look at the box office because it reminds me. It's so nostalgic for me. Somebody's at my door.
It's Michael.
Yeah, Michael Myers.
That's how the movie would play now. And then you look at the camera and he's not there. His face is there.
Right.
So,
also, a reminder: the budget was 300,000, right?
Yeah,
so 47 million on a 300,000 in 1978 is pretty insane.
Yeah, for a long time considered one of the most successful independent films.
Carpenter had done Assault on Precinct 13 right before this. And that's how he knew the producer. 1978 box office. It's funny. These movies hit me in a different way. Like these are movies that are really, really part of my childhood for many. Like I could just talk about 1978 for a while. Grease was number 1 at 160. Superman was number 2 at 134.
Gotta do it.
Yeah, these are so
I think it's on Bob's list.
The weird thing is I had both of those albums on vinyl. It's I had the Superman double-sided album and my sisters had the Grease album. National Lampoon's Animal House was 120 million.
Mm-hmm.
Not a big movie for me. I didn't, it was around, but I didn't care, even though I was an SNL kid. Every Which Way But Loose. It's amazing how ubiquitous that stuff was when I was a kid.
Like that was that big back then. Jesus.
85 million, number 4 at the box office. Heaven Can Wait, 81 million. And this is a big movie for me that people don't talk about too much anymore. Hooper at 78 million. Burt Reynolds as a stuntman. Jaws 2, number 7. Revenge of the Pink Panther, number 8. The Deer Hunter, number 9. And number 10 is Halloween. And I do want to give a shout out to number 11, another very important movie to me that's forgotten nowadays, Foul Play, which was huge for me as a kid.
I love Foul Play.
Yeah, that was a huge one.
Never seen it.
Oh, that was another one that was on like every Sunday morning.
Yeah,
like you could watch that over and over, and I did. It was like they played it on Sunday mornings and stuff like that. So
the hardship of being a modern Chevy Chase fan,
Yes. I love the Chevy Chase Goldie Hawn era.
Oh yeah. No,
they're my favorite.
Same, the best. Yeah. Is that all that you were going to list, Jamie?
Yeah, that's all. That's my.
I never want to. You're so excited to list movies. I never loved.
It's like there's
an important part of the show
is him listing movies.
It gets weird. It gets weirder after that. Like Lord of the Rings is on here. And,
the animated Lord of the Rings. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, it gets strange in the back end, kind of.
Still,
yeah. Convoy.
Oh shit!
Convoy. Yeah, Convoy's on here, number 20.
Okay, well, do you guys want to talk about horror on home turf and party gifts again? Is this Jamie? Did you just mute yourself?
Him.
No, sorry. I was. hold on 1 second. I just want to.
Okay.
Look it up. So we talked about this a little bit last time. That I think some of the best horror movies have kind of what I say that they stick with you. They have these like I say they have parting gifts. They leave you something to take home with you. And as I mentioned the last time, I think there's really a couple major ways you can do that. You can confronting fears and beliefs. So we kind of talked about The Exorcist, that really confronted, it confronted like religion and the fact that people believe if you believe there's possession in the world and the devil, or if you believe in Bigfoot or UFOs or these other paranormal things, this can kind of make them real. And the other two, one of these is horror on the home turf, and the other one is everyday questions, horrible answers. So I think this one's a horror on the home turf. This one sets its story in a very recognizable and relatable atmosphere, so that when you go home, you're thinking, this could happen to me. Like, there could be somebody that just, goes on a killing spree and walks in and
every time I look out my window, Mike Myers could be right there.
It could be right there.
Yeah.
And so this movie really does a great job of that. And I think it's part of the reason why it is one of the scarier movies in some ways, why it is on people's list of scariest movies, because it really does feel like it could happen. And especially before it became a franchise and Supernatural became more of a part of it, even though there's a taste of, is he supernatural in this? It's always plausible in a way, maybe up until he gets shot and then walks off or something in the end. But this is a very plausible story. The babysitter murders, it could totally happen. Not that many people get killed. There's not a huge body count. It's not so.
The kills are feasible too. Like,
they're feasible. It's not over the top. The final girl doesn't know karate or anything. It's not. It just very much feels like it could almost be based on a true story. It's kind of presented almost in that way, I think, as well. Like, it could, like, almost today we get these in Discovery Channel reenactments.
Yeah.
In some ways this felt like it could have been a Discovery Channel, or very good Discovery Channel reenactment, or something. It probably Discovery
That's
Channel.
That's the best compliment, maybe backhanded compliment.
I hear you in a strange sort of way. I almost think it influenced. Like,
no, you're right.
Came
it
later.
Totally did.
I think it. I mean, I don't know what came before.
The way the camera moves and stuff in the openings, it makes me think of 90s television reenactments. I totally get what you're saying.
And the reenactments, how in reenactments shows now, like, they'll start just talking about something and we kind of won't even pay attention to what they're talking about. It's like, hey, you like Bobby Joe. I like that, blah, blah, blah. And they'll just start chattering. That's kind of what this movie does in a weird sort of way. They might just start talking about something. And we get that because then they crank up the music, right? We crank up the John Carpenter while they're chattering. And we realize, oh, what they're talking about isn't really important. They're being stalked. They're being hunted. Or something like that.
So every time you're having a conversation, he can attack. That's the parting gift, right?
Yes. So anyway, I think that's a big part of why this movie sticks with you, is that horror on the home turf aspect, and it's really well done.
It's also the Americana of the home turf, right? Like we've talked about that with Poltergeist. That's really prevalent in Spielberg and Joe Dante and all that stuff back in that day, right? The horror coming to suburbia.
Yes, suburbia.
Right. To our homes, to our front porches.
And really, like, Stephen King and was a big part of that, and Steven Spielberg to an extent. But it was bringing, like, okay, we're not in a castle anymore in Transylvania. We're in your neighborhood.
Fright Night. It's next door. Right.
It's next door. Absolutely.
Right. You guys want to talk about the opening scare? And the double cold opens.
This is sort of a duel. This is Jamie's, and I wanted to talk about the stuff too.
Cool.
Yeah. So I talked about this, I think, maybe in the Jaws podcast, but usually horror movies, at least modern ones, and this one isn't so modern, I guess. One of our older one of our older films that we've done on the podcast.
Maybe the second oldest, right?
Probably. Did we do Star Wars? I guess that was.
We did Star Wars. Yep.
Yeah.
And Exorcist being the oldest, right?
Yeah, it's definitely in the top 3 or 4.
Yeah, right,
for sure. So, most horror movies, even especially slow burn ones like this, they give you some kind of kill in the beginning, so that it's a horror movie. You'll kind of be patient. You'll wait for what's to come. It's very traditional to start with some kind of kill, some kind of scare in the beginning to kind of give you 10 minutes so you can set the stage and you could set the characters and stuff like that and slowly build the dread. Nowadays, it's even more important. It's almost a requirement now. Like it's hard to even think of a movie that doesn't start with some kind of scare or horrific thing in the first 10 minutes. That's a horror movie. I'm sure they're out there. I'm just not thinking of them at the moment, but it's hard to think of one, right? It's
Right.
like,
Can you no.
it's
Off
you know,
the top of my head, no.
I wouldn't recommend it is the point.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like an A24 movie or
Oh.
something, you know. But even like the Ari Aster movies, they start with like, you know, some kind of. Did Hereditary start with a scare? Maybe that one is a good one. Midsommar did.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Jamie, you have labeled it in the past the horror before the horror.
Right, the horror before the horror, and really they fall into a couple different types. There's sometimes the most common type is the kind we see in this movie, which is I think the first kill. You know, it's kind of like it, and it begins,
right?
It begins, yeah. It's the first kill. Then there's a flash forward, which some things cheat, and then some things will actually just be like imagine if this movie started with Laurie Strode getting attacked for the first time, and then we flash back to like, you know, one day earlier or something like that. That's some movies do that almost as that's my cheat technique. I think the time I said that on the podcast, somebody asked me, "Oh, is that really a cheat?" Or they kind
of that's how you have your cold. It's your cake and eat it too, right? Like,
yeah.
You fake a cold open.
It's almost like the one if you really for some reason can't think of anything else.
It's the trailer before the trailer.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's where people go to because I don't know, maybe for some reason the origin of the horror happens like throughout the story. It's hard to imagine, but maybe they do like because even if they did like what I was about to say, like a summoning spell or something, they in most movies they'd show you what happened 100 years ago, the last time they did the summoning spell or something.
Yep.
So it's hard to imagine, but there are times when there's just no other way to put a scare up front. So you have to either go with the kind of the horror before the horror technique, which is like what Midsommar does, or the Descent, like the car accident or something like that.
Yeah.
That's kind of their backstory. It's their shard of glass, or you have to do a flash forward. There's like no other choice. So this one does two different things. So the other one that I was going to mention, there's the origin of horror, which is kind of how the horror got started in the beginning, like what summoned it, what caused it, something like that. So sometimes the origin is the very first thing. And other times it's the first kill, which is, it can be either the first kill ever that the monster did, like, or it could be the first kill in this spree. Like maybe
Get Out, like we see like one of the kidnappings.
Exactly.
Type of thing.
Yeah. Even that one, it's kind of like that one could just be, we don't know how many they've done, but
it's not the first, related. But it's
the most recent before our main character.
Right. And it's relevant later because it's the guy from
Exactly. And like Jaws, we don't know if the shark has killed humans before or something or not. But then in some movies, it's actually literally the origin. Like it could be the summoning of the beast or the first time the beast emerged.
Right.
This one, I'm not sure how to peg it because it's a prelude. So it feels almost like an origin. It feels like the first kill. Like how did Michael Myers become Michael Myers?
Yeah, I would call it Birth of the Monster.
Yeah. I think it's kind of that. And then what this movie does that I find interesting, it almost doubles up on it because the second scene in a lesser movie, I think, could almost be the first scene. Like you could literally start this movie with Loomis riding and talking like he's killed forever and, you know, we're going to transfer him. It's the night, you know, you could start the movie that way. And then there's a horror scene there with the glass breaking and the sanitarium where the people are walking around and stuff. That would be a great opening scene in some ways. But this movie kind of doubles up and puts two. So one is like the origin of the horror. Another one is kind of like almost like it's not really a first kill, but it almost feels that way. It's like when he breaks out of the
Pandora's box is open.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, this movie gives you two of them before we get to Haddonfield.
That's why I put it on there because I thought it was unconventional. I mean, if you never see movies these days that do two cold opens, right? They both have their own merits, right? Like the first one does this very deliberate thing, which is they give us the monster point of view. So that first 7.5 minutes creates that audience participation against our will too. Like we don't have a choice
Right.
but to be seeing, feeling, experiencing the world through the killer's eyes. And that sets the stage. Like I feel like without that prologue, when it happens later, it's not as impactful because they haven't that created like that, you know, they haven't imbued it with meaning the way that the whole first 7 minutes does. You know what I mean? And then the second one is our first, which we're going to get into later, our first one long praise of the killer speech, right? From Loomis, that it's very reminiscent, or, you know, it did it first, but it's very much like when Jodie Foster's character, when Clarice is being walked through the asylum and everybody's warning her about, you know, Lecter, like, don't do this, and you got to understand what you're dealing with. He's dangerous. You can't do this. And what, are you sure you're ready for this? Blah, blah, blah. So it creates that sense of dread before we meet the monster. So they both are really, they earn their place, right? Like if you take one of them out, the movie's not as good without it. So I just thought it was very instructive that like, hey, maybe you can do 2 cold opens now in 2023 in your script and it'll work. You know, if it earns its place, if it has a function.
Yeah, it's cool.
I definitely don't feel like it's a hat on a hat or anything.
No,
like that.
No, it's not. No,
it's like this prelude, and then it really kicks the story off with the second one. So, yeah, I think it totally works. Where I think a lot of people could, I think a lot of lesser writers in modern day, if they tried to do this, it could be a hat and a hat. You know, it could just be like,
it's like
we did one kill and then we did another or something.
Also, like Loomis is responding. He's also like telling us about the time we missed, the 15-year jump. You know what I mean? Like it's all filling in that gap. We see where it started. He fills in that 15 years.
And to have the first 11.5 minutes be Michael centric is very, you know, it's very impactful. Like it creates this extra sense of it adds to the mythos, you know, and it
also stops us from relating to him in any way possible.
Yes.
Yeah. Which creates the fear, right?
Yeah.
It's funny too, because this story is very much like a ghost story you'd tell, you know, at a slumber party or something. And then he escaped that night, and it was Halloween night, and you know, and it's very much just a classic
campfire tale.
Campfire tale, yeah.
You literally just mentioned Dread Flags, Jimmy. So did you guys want to talk about that? You had a breakdown?
Yeah,
I'm excited.
I did.
Yeah.
So I did a book report this time. I stole.
Nice.
I stole from Jimmy's Thunder.
I got book reports. Don't worry.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So we've on a lot of these horror episodes. I've been talking about something that I kind of noticed on the podcast when we did. Why do I always forget this movie's name when we're about to say it? The one with the red flags. The what's it called? What's that movie called? The one with the mommy
and the giant bottle.
And the giant bottle. Why do I always forget this?
Barbarian.
Barbarian.
Oh, right. Okay. I was like,
well, there's 106 episodes. We're allowed to
Barbarian.
We're
right.
talking about.
For some reason,
if you said Justin Long, I would have been on it. You know,
for some reason, whenever we talk about it, I always say the Beast. For some reason, I'm like, that's not right, and I'm like, it's something else. But it's Barbarian.
Admittedly, the title is the most confusing part of that movie.
Yeah,
you know.
It's the one with Arnold, and he's like, you know,
come on,
he's pushing,
get down.
He's pushing the wheel, and he pushes and pushes.
All three of us did great. Terrible
Arnold impression.
There you go. Barbarian would have been much better if he was.
I think every movie would be better if Arnold was
exactly, definitely.
Well, can you imagine when they got to the basement, how great of a twist it would have been if he was playing that character? And that's why it was called Barbarian.
I'm sure someone has used AI to put him in that basement.
It'd be awesome.
If not, they will now. So you put it out there. So
he's like, "Fight Rob, drink your milk."
That is so bad. All right.
Let some steam out, Bennett.
Right.
Okay. So anyway, in that movie, the the creator of that movie said that when he was initially crafting the opening part, he was reading a book about red flags of dates or people like that you meet or something like that. It was some kind of like, if you meet someone, here are some red flags. And I think it was mostly related to women meeting creepy men and red flags that might show up. But after that, it kind of inspired me to think, like, what is dread other than a bunch of red flags that are either noticed and ignored by characters or noticed by the audience and not noticed by the characters. And I think that's, if you're looking to create dread in your story, and I think you should be looking to create dread in your story, a lot of dread early on, especially in the first half or at least the first third of your movie, just start presenting lots of warnings and red flags that go either missed by the main character or ignored by the main character outright. And when I watch Halloween, and when I watched it this time, I was struck. I was like, this movie is to these dread flags what Raiders of the Lost Ark is to action. It is nonstop dread flags, nonstop. Like every scene is about a dread flag.
Right.
And it just stacks and stacks and stacks. And I honestly think when I watched it, I think that's why this movie's so great. It's just like
it is
nonstop barrage of, and if you watch it, it is all, that's all it's doing. Like every other thing it's doing, like meeting characters and stuff, is almost secondary to what the dread is. Anyway, so with that, I did a little case study. And my case study, where I actually picked it up was the Haddonfield, the modern day 1978 Haddonfield scene. So this is after Loomis discovers Michael's escaped and all that. And we open up on a scroll that says it's Haddonfield Halloween. And that begins our first dread flag. And I've labeled these. I have my own labels for these. I call that one a witching hour dreadful date. And it just, Halloween itself is a dreadful date. Friday the 13th is a dreadful date. Midnight is a dreadful time, you know? And if you just pop that up on the screen, instantly it's a warning flag to the audience and it creates dread.
So you're a Monster Squad episode, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that alone, even in the title, we're getting our first touch of dread. Then we meet Laurie, and her dad says, "Don't forget to drop the keys at the Myers place." And we're like, if you're in the audience, you're like, "Oh no,
yeah, don't do that."
What are they thinking? You know. So right then, I mean, just from the first line of dialogue, that's what you get. So Laurie goes for a long, long walk. And I have another dread flag, all too quiet, all too alone. The suburbs are completely empty. Nobody's in the streets, no cars. She's all alone. Everything's too quiet. So immediately, and of course the music starts pumping in, which in this movie, much like Jaws, I think it's a dread signal. It's kind of a siren that something's coming. It's a warning sign. So Laurie approaches the Myers house. And it's Tommy Doyle, right? That's the boy.
Yep.
Yeah, he comes and he warns her that it's a spook house and you're not supposed to go there. And these are outright warnings, you know, of the evil or the monster, you know. And Laurie makes fun of it, and that's mocking of the beast. So anytime you kind of mock, like make a joke of it, it's kind of mocking. And she walks right up to the front porch, which is another one that I call approaching the lair. So more dread. So there's a warning. There's a mocking. She walks right up. And then, of course, we get a monster POV shot, which is another one because she doesn't know there's a monster on the other side. Michael's there watching and listening and breathing deeply.
And what happened the last time the audience had a POV shot? We've already
Exactly.
set it up, right?
We've already established it. So then Tommy gives another form of warning. He gives a history lesson. It's a history lesson of evil. He tells about horrible things happened in that house and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And it's just another warning that kind of goes ignored. Or at least subtly gets shrugged off. You could tell there's these things are slowly building in Laurie a little bit to make her a little more worried. And then she goes off singing. and she sings a song that has lyrics that kind of mock the beast again. I wish I had you all alone. And, us as an audience are like, oh yeah, well, you'll see, you'll get them. And then he steps out for another monster POV stalking shot. And there's another thing called silent and deadly. When you have a character that's just silent and creepily silent, just staring and stuff, that's silent and deadly. And he's like the embodiment of that 100%. Then we cut to a scene with Loomis giving more spoken warnings about what's coming. But the official doesn't take him seriously. So it's more and more dread. Like I said, every single moment is just piling on the warnings and the warnings and the warnings. And
also, isn't that the scene where Michael is behind the shot for the audience? Like he drives past, right?
Yeah.
No, that's later.
Is that later? Okay, that's
later.
later.
The hardware
when he
store.
drives by.
Still, that also works.
Yeah. So then we go to a classroom scene, and the classroom scene, this one's kind of subtle, but they're talking about fate and stuff like that.
I don't think it's subtle at all.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
I have it on my later, but keep going.
Okay. Yeah, and I have a dread flag called prophesizing the horror, and I think that's kind of where it's
yes,
yeah,
love it.
There'll be this collision, and we're in trouble. Meanwhile, she's looking out. She sees the car, and it vanishes almost like in a paranormal way. And when you have this kind of quick paranormal moments, or another element of dread, like this thing can pop up anywhere at once. It can show
manifest,
up.
And
it can manifest. And they use that. They come back to that a few times in this early section. So back to the, I guess, grade or middle school. I guess he's in grade school, but the bullies are like saying, he's going to get you, the boogeyman. And again, we're mocking the beast again. And we're prophesizing the horror. We're saying it's coming, it's coming. And they're chanting about the boogeyman and kind of making fun of him. And he's right there. So then we have a thing called invasion of privacy, which is the stalking. It's this monster POV. So he's stalking a boy, and it's just, he keeps stalking. We see it, but the boy doesn't, Tommy doesn't see it. So it's more and more dread just building. And notice there's really hardly any scares. There's a couple quick kind of fake jump scares, but nothing big here. It's all like just building.
It's not jump scares as we know them now.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
So Loomis is again prophesizing the horror and being ignored. This is where he walks towards a truck and sees the abandoned truck and Michael's tattered hospital clothes.
Yeah.
So all of this is evidence of the evil. It's coming. He's done some stuff. He's got a plan. Then we cut to that long scene of the girls walking home. And once again, it's all too alone, all too quiet. Nobody on the suburbs. It's completely just them. And the mysterious car from earlier appears, and we know it's Michael. So it's another invasion of privacy. There's also a thing I call out of place. Like that car is like a sanitarium hospital car. Right. And it's like just driving around, and it's like, okay.
Fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. And another cinematic, this is a cinematic flag. Again, not really a written one, but there are ways to write this for sure. But that long steady cam shot, tightly framed, is also another dread-inducing kind of thing.
Because the audience wants to look.
The audience wants to see, like, is he in front of him? Is he behind?
Right.
Especially now after we've seen enough movies like this, now it's almost like a signal to us. We're doing the John Carpenter thing, here it comes. So then Michael's standing by the bush, and he's doing the silent and deadly thing again, which is creepy. And again, if you can imagine Halloween, the first time people saw Michael Myers, this is their introduction to him, is he just stands there and doesn't talk, and he's wearing a mask. He's out of place with a mask, and he's just doing the silent and deadly thing. And breathing. It's also a bomb under the table. It's a Hitchcock bomb under the table, because we know what he's capable of and what he's done, but they don't. So we have superior position in that way. So these are bombs under the table constantly. There's just a bomb walking around Haddonfield, and we're seeing it, and everybody else doesn't care. They don't care. And then once again, they kind of mock the beast. Like they pretend like they know who he is, and they're kind of goofing around with him. He ducks behind the bush. And Laurie's friend does something I call entering the kill zone, where she gets closer and closer. Instead of running, she walks towards him, and she enters the kill zone. But again, in a paranormal way, he's gone. He's just vanished. So a little later, and I'm almost done here, Laurie bumps into the sheriff, and And, you know, he says, it's Halloween. Everyone's entitled to one good scare. So it's another one of those kind of cheesy prophesizing the horror lines. Like everybody's going to regret what they say the next day because they all said this kind of stuff. And then at her house, she hears some creepy noises. It's just trick-or-treaters. And then she says something, well, kiddo, I hope you outgrew, you know, I think I
thought you outgrew superstition.
I thought you outgrew. I had the word wrong. I thought you outgrew superstition, which is a much debated weird line in Halloween. Like everybody's like, why does she say that when she sees the kids? But I actually think it's there's another dread flag called I say gaslighting, whether either somebody gaslights you or you gaslight yourself.
Right.
And because it really is, she has all these warnings, and finally, what's her final decision on all these warnings? Come on, grow up. You know, it's all just Halloween. And then last but not least, she goes in a room, silent and deadly Michael is there, and out of place Michael is staring, you know, doing another invasion of privacy in her yard. And she gets the phone call, and it's her friend on the other end after deep breathing and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the section I particularly did, because it's really the section where no outright scares or horror or killing takes place. It's just one dread scene after another. It's just all about dread. It's like, I think 15 minutes of straight dread. And that's all it does, is it just pours dread on while introducing you to all the characters, all the settings, and the scenario that's going to take place on Halloween night. One other one, I mean, just the fact Halloween decorations and stuff like that, that's another, there's not a ton of them actually in the beginning. You see some people in costumes.
It's like a jack-o'-lantern on a house porch. And
yeah. But some of that stuff can also be, you know, I call it dark decor. It's just, you know, just like if you went into like a spooky house or something like that, it might have stuff that induce dread as well. So that's it. That's my
I just used dark decor in my own script as a dread flag, Jamie.
Oh, cool. Cool. I honestly have to be
like a tentacle on a wall for a decor.
I have some scripts I have to kind of go back and almost look at these and put more dread in things. Like sometimes I write things and I don't think about the stuff at all, but I almost think it could be useful to kind of go back and look at all the different variances of it.
Yeah, you're making shortcuts there to your scare pass that you've been hired to do in the past, basically.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I'm like, hey, let me just go back and concentrate on the dread part. And I can kind of look at all my things and brainstorm like, oh, okay, well, I can mock the beast a little bit. I can prophesize the horror. I can do this. I can do that.
It adds up.
And it adds up. Because they're really small touches. They're really small. They're not always big and overt and huge. They're not, you know, a lot of these things are just sometimes a sentence here and there, you know, that you're putting. And
that also feels like something lesser movies would just kind of forget.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So. It feels like it would just let it go by without caring.
I think so. I mean, I think back to the movie I directed not long ago that'll hopefully be out soon. And I kind of wish I had, you know, if I had these tools back then, I probably would have just jacked the whole front end of the movie up with these. Like I have a bunch of them already, just instinctually, but I probably would have like done the John Carpenter thing and just poured them in.
That's all right. Next time, Jamie.
Next time I will. Yeah.
Well, that brings us to a thing we've talked about so many times. Monster in the House.
I'm sorry, Jamie. I had to do it. I had to put it on here and wind you up. And
no problem.
I think the movie merits it. I think the movie does merit it.
It does. So Monster in the House is a Save the Cat term. It comes from the Save the Cat genres. Save the Cat genres are story patterns. So they're not like the blockbuster genres. They're not like comedy and horror. Instead, they're like the type of story you're telling, the type of plot you're telling. And some examples of those are, there's the Golden Fleece, which is about a group of people that are traveling almost on a quest or on a road to win some prize, to claim some trophy, to do something. There's Buddy Love, which are like buddy movies and romance movies. There's Full Triumphant, which is kind of like a goofy character that is underestimated and kind of triumphs over all. So there's all these different story patterns. And the one we commonly come back to, and this is why I have to do it every time, every podcast, is Monster in the House. And Monster in the House covers, in my opinion, you don't have a horror movie really if you don't have a Monster in the House movie. And it's debatable, because you could say a movie like Underworld or something is a horror movie, but I think Underworld's an action movie.
Absolutely.
But people would, they kind of fall to similar crowds because there's vampires in them or something like that. But to me, Monster in the House is true horror because it becomes purely about survival. And it has three elements. It has a monster, which is, it could be any evil. It could be a curse. It could be a haunting. It could be a killer like this. It could be Jaws. So the monster is first. The house is usually the location the creature is preying upon. I guess it can sometimes be geographic. Sometimes it could be the human body or something like that. Mm-hmm. My big twist on this, not that, and when I say my big, it's not really my big at all. I'm sure Blake had the same idea. I always find it important to identify the trap. Why are they trapped in the house? I think that helps define your house. Like what's not allowing them to just run away or maybe bring in help or something like that. So I think there's something to discuss in this movie about that.
That's why I brought it up. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
And last but not least, the sin. There's usually a sin that brings about the monster. We just did The Exorcist. We had a good debate on that, on whether it was faith. Was it lack of faith that was the sin? Mm-hmm. Poltergeist is my always go-to when I describe this. Right. They built the house on top of a graveyard and just removed the tombstones, and now there's ghosts. So the sin brought about the monster. So they're the three elements of Monster in the House. Let's talk about Halloween and how they have a monster, a house, and a sin.
What's the monster? What do you?
Gee,
I think it's that Tommy Doyle kid.
Yeah.
No, it's
the government's lack of funding of the asylum.
That's the sin.
That might be the sin. No, so I'll save the. I have a whole thing on the monster in a little while, but I did want to talk about the trap. This notion of the trap, Jamie.
Yeah.
Because I think it's an interesting discussion, and the sin is also an interesting discussion for this. So what do you think? Is there a trap, Jamie?
Yeah, and it's and some of this I think goes to the realism of it. I think the fact that it's not contrived in any way speaks to it. I don't necessarily think there's a trap per se, but I think here's the weird thing. I have in my maybe one day written book or published book, I have like different types of traps. And one of the ones, I'm trying to look it up now.
He's breaking out all of them. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I have one I can't find it.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
I'm not sure what I called it, but it's basically, I would say, babysitting can be a bit of a trap. Because she cannot leave, she can't run.
She's responsible for
their
lives.
responsibility.
Yeah.
That ties in with the possible sin discussion.
So I honestly think it's almost a situational addition to the house. It's the house she's babysitting at is sort of a trap, and even though I think Haddonfield would be that.
It's trap. The house, yeah. But
It's the house. Sure. It's the house in general because he's stalking Haddonfield. But for her trap is babysitting. She cannot do much because she is stuck with that kid and she can't just run out on him and take off or something like that.
That's it. So, she can't run away, dude.
Yeah.
That's good, Jamie.
And I can't remember what I called it in my book. You'll have to buy my book one day when it's out in 2026. And you can figure it out.
Yeah. Order now. Right.
No, and the sin. So here
I've got something for this.
So Bob's got something, and I want you to go. Yeah. But I want to give the context. So I listened. I know you guys didn't, but I listened to a podcast we did 5 years ago on 2018, and Jamie talked about what he thought the sin was 5 years ago of this movie that we're doing
man.
now.
Oh yeah, just do it.
And I thought it was a good one, but it made me go like, oh, well, maybe there's more than one sin. So anyway, go ahead, Bob, and then I'll tell you what Jamie said.
Oh, okay, so I
It's
found
funny,
this.
like this feels like a memory test. Like check my cognitive abilities because I have no recollection of it whatsoever.
So I did I just I always do I don't do what you guys do usually for the podcast. I just sort of do my own research.
Yeah,
And then I came across this fact, which I think speaks to the sin. John Carpenter and Debra Hill have stated many times over the years that they did not conspicuously set out to depict virginity as a way of defeating a rampaging killer. No. The reason why the horny teens all die is simply that they are so preoccupied with getting laid that they don't notice that there is a killer at large. On the other hand, Laurie Strode spends a lot of time on her own and is therefore more alert.
She's responsible.
I've seen modern takes on this movie saying how, it seems that the sin was the people who died were having sex and, so that was never intended. That's
more so Friday the 13th. It feels like,
was after this.
Yeah. Or even Freddy a little bit, right?
Well, maybe they didn't intend it, but
they didn't intend it.
I
just think it's important to say
hear their words. Absolutely,
to hear their words and their perspective.
It's funny, Bob, because on that note, I have a quote from John Carpenter.
Yeah.
Like responding to those things. But I want to hear Jamie first. Jamie, what's your take now, and see how it compares to then? I'm going to memory test you.
You know what's funny? I really do. Now I'm trying to scramble more to think about what I thought of and less.
Jamie, I couldn't remember anything we said either, so don't feel too bad.
I went and listened.
You listened to it, right? Yeah. I'm saying I can't remember.
No, I would think that whatever observation I made back then, I would probably make now. But my observation now is that this is a movie where the killer has no motive and there's no sin, and that's what makes it more scary. There's no reason for this. It's very nihilistic. So it's kind of surprising that I came up with one. So I'm curious as to what I came up with.
Okay, we didn't really define fully. Sin is like the societal ill, right? Something is wrong with society, and because people are doing it, the monster is created, or it attracts the monster. It perpetuates the monster's evil doing. The evil creates the evildoers. So Jamie, you said in 2018 that the sin of this movie is underestimating the power of evil, and that every single person is, basically like, who cares? It's mocking the evil. It's like one long red flag,
except
for Loomis. Loomis is the only one that isn't.
Yeah, that kind of does track actually, because especially after that long book report I just did, because Loomis is like, you have to be worried, get ready. And everybody's like, nah, that's okay, and that we don't care. It's all just superstition and ghost stories.
Right. And what I thought was cool since we've done Jaws is that if you're looking at it through that lens, Sheriff Brackett is a subversion of Jaws, and he's the Mayor Vaughn of this story, right? Like Loomis is coming to him and he's like, you're basically saying without saying, cancel Halloween. And he's like, oh, whatever, all your fancy talk and your blood. He literally says more fancy talk. Okay. And somebody breaks into the hardware store, steals rope and a knife. Oh, what does that sound like to you? Sounds like kids to me. Like Sheriff Brackett is completely underestimating the evil. Everybody is underestimating the evil, even Laurie for much of the movie, even though she recognizes that there's some weird stalker, that fear de-escalates. And, Tommy's shaking her, the boogeyman's outside. And she's like, oh, it's just trick-or-treaters. It's just the tricks and treats of Halloween, so.
The guy with the mask isn't weird today.
Yeah, exactly. Underestimating that there's evil out there to be feared.
Right.
I think all of that tracks. But I wanted to say, despite what you read from John Carpenter and Debra Hill, which those are the people that we should be listening to, I think that not necessarily sex, but like that choosing gratification over responsibility is what created the monster. I would argue that he is, even though he does kill randomly, he does have this sister surrogate motivation. Like, he brings her, after he kills the one woman, like, he puts his sister's grave on the bed. Like, that's very intentional. Like, you're like my sister, you're choosing gratification over responsibility. And Laurie's the one character who's choosing responsibility over gratification, whereas everybody else is having sex or partying instead of taking care of kids, and they're getting killed. I mean, it's definitely there, and that's what created the monster. You know,
I think they might be. I think their response that I read might more be them saying they don't want to depict that like morally. They didn't want the movie to be against having sex or something like that.
So the reason
virginity is pure or something.
Right. The reason I got this,
it's not a conservative movie.
Right. No, and I got this, you know, we were talking about on The Exorcist, how maybe wasn't fully the intent, but it was just like a product of the society it was created in, right? So I was reading Men, Women, and Chainsaws. You know, I debated how much to go into all of this because that's not really what this podcast is about. There's not really much instructive about it, but it's interesting to talk about, right? When we're talking about, like, well, you have a horror movie and how to make it, you're trying to write a script, like, how do you make it interesting? The sin is where it's at, right? That creates the reason to tell the story, right? So This is the whole thing. It's a great book if anybody's out there and interested more in this kind of topic, by Carol Clover, Men, Women, and Chainsaw. She's the one who created the term final girl. And the whole book is basically arguing that 70s, 80s modern horror, when this was written, was a response to feminism, right? Like, the society was changing because of feminism, and that's why we started getting these women characters who were no longer just victims. You know, they were empowered and they were the strongest ones to survive.
That's exactly what I'm saying. The thing that I read is them responding to somebody saying it's actually kind of not a very feminist message of what the movie, if you know what I mean, under a microscope.
Under a microscope.
The women that choose to like, you know, explore their sexuality get murdered, but the one who doesn't lives. It's not, and they're probably like, no, we didn't mean that. That's not.
I have some more on this when we get to Laurie. Just some quotes from John Carpenter. So
interesting enough, and I'd like to talk about the classroom scene and how
let's just into it too. Let's just go to that, and then I'll talk about loop structure in there.
Let me jump one thing before that. In some ways, when, you know, going back to my words, like back in 2018 or whatever, I look at that. Why does he target her? And it seems to happen at the house when she slips the key.
I always assumed it was just because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he imprinted on her at that moment.
And that's it. And to me, that's
not what the sequels say. But.
Right. No, exactly. I'm not going with the sequel.
Right.
But to me, that speaks more to that kind of ignoring the evil kind of thing, because she knows there's a haunted house, blah blah blah. She's putting the key under the door. She's making jokes.
Power of evil.
Face. And he looks at her and he's like, okay, you're mine. While she's like laughing in the face of it. But if she like gave it the respect it was due, then maybe she wouldn't just be putting a key up there.
It's definitely there.
It's interesting because again, this is going to be my new bingo card, but in the book I've been toying with, I have a list of sins, you know, because I'm trying to help you fill out your monster in the house. I have a list of monsters, a list of sins, a list of houses, things like that. And one of them is hubris, arrogance, which I think is where that would fit in some ways. And like the one I always quote for that is like the Blair Witch Project. Like they're thinking, the Blair Witch, it's just a stupid story, you know, and they go in there and there's a Blair Witch. Or 1408 is another one. Like, I'm not scared of no stupid hotel room.
Yeah, well.
And then stuff
happened.
We referenced that last episode too. It's funny.
Yeah, so you know, I don't know. I'm tempted to put this one in that box. I'll have to think about it.
I think there's a little column A and B.
Yeah,
you know?
I think
they all kind of track to me.
Yeah,
you know?
and you know, they weren't thinking
Even the
about
nihilism tracks, Jamie. I think a little bit.
and let's talk about the reason that I brought nihilism up, Jamie, is number one because you talked about it on the 2018 episode, and so I want to hear you talk about it again. And number two, because it loops in with the odd structure discussion. So, do you want to talk about the classroom first, or you want to talk about the structure first?
I mean, why don't we jump to the classroom, because I think it directly
talks. I feel like we've also kind of been teasing the classroom. So
yeah. So in the history of this podcast, we have noticed that when there is a theme, when you want to learn the theme, if there's a scene in a classroom, you go to the classroom, whatever's on the board, whatever the teacher is saying, whatever the students are debating, is the thematic debate that the movie is about.
Scream 2.
Especially with older movies. Yes, yeah. Even Hereditary.
Scream 2. Nightmare on Elm Street, right?
Yeah, Candyman.
Right.
Yeah. It's a college lecture about urban legends. Yeah.
Right.
I think if I ever had a classroom scene,
Raiders.
I'm not sure that I've ever had a classroom scene, but mine is going to be about some mundane thing. So some future podcast is going to be deciphering it. Like, why are they talking about the periodic table of elements? That must be the theme. I don't know.
What does that have to do with a werewolf?
Exactly.
So I wrote down what they said, and it's funny. I wrote down what they said, and afterwards I looked up the script, and it's actually in the original script exactly as it's in the movie. So
nice.
What the teacher is saying, and I love that they don't even show the teacher; they just show Laurie and then Michael.
It's a real Peanuts scene.
It sounds like a very 80-yard teacher, doesn't it? It sounds
yeah.
It always seems like a different level, and it's just really strange.
Yeah, but the teacher says what Samuel is talking about is fate. Fate caught up with several lives here. No matter what course of action Collins took, he was destined to his own fate, his own day of reckoning. The idea is that destiny is a very real, concrete thing that a person has to deal with. Fate is immovable, like a mountain. It stands where man passes away. Fate never changes. So, I mean, it's pretty clear they wanted you to hear that and feel that and contemplate that.
The rest of her night is set.
Yeah, as we're intercutting between Michael stalking her and her noticing and then him disappearing.
Hey, you know what the weird thing about the classroom scene for me is? It feels like it sets up the sequels.
Yeah,
that we're disregarding. Like every time I watch this movie, I'm always like, it's weird how people disregard them, and then it's like this scene right here is like literally saying it to me.
Yeah,
that they're destined to be together in some weird way.
That's maybe he was playing with those ideas.
Maybe, it's possible.
It could be me like having a hammer and chasing a nail, sort of thing. But I feel like this is a message in some ways to the audience, that horror at home thing. Like, there's nothing you can do. If there's a Michael Myers in your neighborhood, you're going to get him. You know what I mean? You can't run. You can't hide. He's going to get you, And I that's the way my brain processes.
It's nihilistic for sure. Yeah. I mean, the movie ends with her crying. It made me think of this time. And I want to loop back into the structure discussion. I don't want to forget about that. But watching the end of this movie, and then I recently saw Scream 6, and they've just been stabbed. Each of them has been stabbed like 6 times, and they're laughing and joking in the ambulance about, after they just had this horrible ordeal. It's like such a contrast. like they just have been stabbed so many times, each of them, that none of them should be alive, and they're laughing with each other about this, after the aftermath of surviving another Ghostface ordeal. Laurie is crying. It's the boogeyman. It was the boogeyman, and he's gone. Like she didn't actually kill him. So it's such a contrast.
Well, yes, it's her first time, and she's already broke down.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what 2018 is playing off of too.
Yeah, exactly.
For better or worse. Did you want to still talk about plot structure?
The reason I brought it up is because it really one of the most, given that this show is so often about that arc plot, classic Hollywood structure, one of the most interesting things about this movie is how much it isn't that, right, Jamie? And I don't know. I kind of want to get you to start your spiel on arc plot versus mini plot, and then we can bounce off of it.
Yeah, and this is another thing. We tracked on the podcast when we do horror movies, just how often they don't fit your standard, beginning, middle, end style plot, or maybe they have a beginning, middle, end, but they don't have some of the things we talk about when we talk about the arch plot, which is like active characters, heroes with goals, chasing something.
Yeah.
And instead, we have a hero here. Now it's funny because
Michael Myers could be the hero he's chasing.
Well, I actually thought about that when I was watching this time. I was like, I wonder if I could do a beat sheet from Michael Myers.
Yeah.
And you could, but because he doesn't have an arc, it doesn't totally work the right way.
He definitely has a long list of things that need fixing.
He learns he can survive bullets. That's his arc.
Right. And then there's an argument for Loomis, but he doesn't really have the plot twist.
He disappears for too long for that.
Does.
Yeah.
He does. It's just kind of a chase. There is a Save the Cat beat sheet for Halloween that was published.
Don Roth. Ago. I read it for yeah.
My gut said I probably would disagree with it to an extent. Like I'd probably be like, hey, you're kind of stretching. I get it. But it's weird. I almost think the way you have to look at it. So arch plot, again, cause effect, heroes with goals.
Closed loops.
And then mini plot is more like the hero really doesn't have a goal. They're just kind of, things can happen randomly or stuff like that. It's not necessarily, there's not a lot of like, this person is trying to do this, but this is in the way. And that's what this movie doesn't have. Laurie's not trying to do anything except babysit, and she's reacting to weird stuff that happens, which is a very realistic model. If it was a documentary, that's the way you'd have to make it. And that's why I think a lot of horror movies work. Why do horror movies work this way, but other movies don't? Or most other movies don't? Not all. I mean, there are some movies. But horror movies work this way, I think, because we have superior position. We know the bomb is out there. So everything they do...
That sustains you. That nourishes the audience. Yeah.
The dread flags keep pumping and pumping and pumping. And it's almost like the audience is making a narrative in their own head while the character is oblivious to it.
Yep.
So the character is just there watching TV, and there's all kinds of mayhem that's about this fate thing they talked about in the classroom scene is about to hit them right in the head. And we know it, and we're just waiting till it happens. And we're hoping they see it earlier than they do, but they never see it soon enough. And it just it's a formula that works in horror movies that does not really work almost anywhere else. I mean,
right.
There's probably some dramas that work like a horror movie. Like there's this inevitable bugaboo, horrific thing. And there's a person living their life, and we have superior position, and it probably works in the same way.
Yeah.
But it's not very common. And I can't think of what that movie would be, but I'm sure it's some Sundance movie I've seen that I liked. But
Jamie, earlier you said too about how like when there's like a lot of scenes in this movie specifically where the girls are gabbing and it kind of doesn't matter what they're saying as much, but the audience is like feeding off of the dread, right? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like it's not about all that stuff. Like, but in another genre like comedy or something, almost every line has to matter. You know what I mean?
Right. Yes.
Right. You know what I mean? Like it's a different type of thing. It can't be sustained on that at all. Wayne's World is not sustained on dread. So,
this is all building to the collision, right? It reminded me of The Exorcist that we just did before this, which is, there's like 75 minutes of The Exorcist before Damien, before Damien and Reagan meet. And that is the whole movie is building up to that collision, promising that A story, B story collision.
This isn't that much different, right?
No, like I know.
How long till night, right?
No, it's almost exactly the same. So I tracked that. So we and that's what's interesting. It's that lock-in discussion that Jamie talks about. It's so different here. Typically with the arch plot, right, Jamie? It's the character is in an arch plot movie is locked in usually about 25% to that goal, and the whole movie this happens in dramas, this happens in comedies, is centered on achieving that goal that's in your log line from like 25 to 30% onward. And here we have superior position. We and Dr. Loomis are locked in by 11 minutes that he's out. The evil is out there. He's gone, you know, and Lori, even though she gets that phone call where her friend is killed on the other end, and she's alerted that that's particularly sketchy. And earlier, you know, he's stalking her, but her fear of that guy really de-escalates and she's not thinking about him anymore. It isn't until 76 minutes that she finds the bodies. So there you go, Bob. The A and B, it's almost the same minute as in Exorcist.
That's crazy. I wouldn't have guessed it was that close.
76 minutes that she finds the haunted house, right? Like all the bodies fall down in front. That's 76 minutes. So she isn't locked in until, and that's 84% of the movie.
Yeah, all is lost, basically.
So for 84% of the movie, our main character doesn't even know there's a killer to be feared. That's super unconventional.
Yeah. So my theory on this is kind of the way I always explain this. There are two types of horror structures. For lack of a better term, I call structure one relentless horror, and structure two slow burn horror. Okay. And I think the relentless horror, so I think all horror eventually becomes a battle for survival. Every single horror movie is somehow a fight for survival in the end. It's some type of survival, you know, whether it's your kid's survival, your survival, something. And I think what happens, and we talked about this in The Exorcist too, is where your lock-in happens that becomes battle for survival is what depends. If it's the midpoint or all is lost or break into 3, you are in a slow burn horror.
Or you should be trying to make it do a slow burn horror stuff. Yeah.
And then other movies like, let's say Evil Dead or something like that, or a zombie movie or Don't Breathe or something, they get locked into their survival by the break into 2.
Yep. The end of Act 1. Yep.
I think what I always found why I love Poltergeist so much is because it gives you kind of all the feel of a slow burn horror in the early parts, but locks into a survival story by like breaking the late break.
It doesn't
into
feel
2.
slow at all.
It doesn't feel slow at all,
Yeah,
but somehow it manages to give you all of it. You know, it's like it gives you the discovery in the setup. But anyway, so this movie is all about the inevitable. It's kind of like an all is lost when it hits.
When
like
she's locked into survival. Yeah. Ooh, 84%. But
so what that means is that the rest of your movie, in my opinion, if you're thinking save the cat wise, and again, you'd need completely different instruction, in my opinion, to do the slow burn version. Everything prior to the lock-in, so in this case, the all is lost, in your hero's mind is really similar to the debate, because you're debating, is there a killer? Is something bad happening? Am I in trouble? It's like this long debate. It's this long question mark over whether you're in a battle for survival or not. And then when the lock-in hits, you're in a battle for survival.
Yeah.
And then
this movie definitely does that. It just really de-escalates her during that midsection when other people are getting killed.
Yeah.
And
it's like, when will she notice? When will it start? When will it happen?
And you know what? That's when they ramp up for her. Her attention is way more on that guy that her friend told. Hey, Lori likes you. And now she's really worried about that for like the next 25 minutes. Every conversation is like, oh, don't tell him not to, you know, she's really worried.
That's the crisis of her life until, you know, knife guy comes up. Go ahead.
So a lot of horror movies, and I'm not sure that this one does this as strictly as this, but what they do is they give you a different story, just same as The Exorcist, right? And we talked about like, what's the log line? Like if you really did the log line for this and you did it by the old rules I usually set out, it would probably be something more like that, right? It would be about a girl babysitting while she's
trying to get her friend to stop.
And
that could be a comedy teen movie.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it, is you create like a real life mundane story. And then the audience knows that this isn't that story
That's
at all.
not what it is. The character's in a
the character
different type of
doesn't know
movie
it.
that
Yeah.
they realize they're in.
Yeah, your audience should never be like, will she go out on that date?
Yeah, exactly.
You're doing something
No,
wrong.
we're like desperate. The dread flags. We're
like-
desperate for her
Right.
to align with what we know.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
So the tension is just cranking
Yeah.
and cranking and cranking. And yeah, and you can take it all the way to The All Is Lost.
Man,
the
that's
75-minute
so cool and instructive to take
Yeah.
away from this. Jamie, I have a couple other quotes from you from other podcasts.
This is how long we've been
I'm sure
doing
this
this.
No,
is
I
another-
just I
We're
have
referencing
I-
us.
I have
We're referencing.
no, I have my
No, I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining.
I have my topics. It's got
In 1977, you said,
no.
We're Back to the Future
in-
2ing our
in
own
the
show.
in the episodes where I talk about arch plot versus mini plot, where we're focused on mini plot, there's been a couple good points that have come along that sort of support the fact that it's nihilistic, and I think it's instructive when you're at the starting phase and you're like, okay, what kind of story am I going to tell with this horror movie that I have in my head, right? Am I going to do an arch plot, which Scream is an arch plot, or am I going to do a mini plot, which is Halloween isn't a mini plot, right? And what's the difference? Well, Scream is not nihilistic, and Halloween is, and if you understand that you want to take a nihilistic approach, then that will be informative of which kind of structure you use, right? So something you said that I think is really instructive to this is, you say, arch plot hates fate. The theme is the way we wish the world would be. Mini plot always leans into fate. Mini plot says, this is life, deal with it. The theme is the way the world is. And mini plot often uses fate as the reason for why things are happening. Which the whole goddamn go to the classroom.
Right.
You didn't say these things on Halloween 2018. You said these in like the Fablemans, but here we are. To your point, Jamie, the entire classroom preaches what you just explained most mini plots function as. So anyway,
yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Who
good
said
job,
that?
Jamie.
So I wish
like
I
we
said
said-
stuff like that now.
We've said on the show before, like mini plot horror movies, like look at A24, right? And most of those would be how the world really is.
How the world is. Right.
Fate.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. So
Now, so there's another kind of related to this, but not totally. There's another horror beat I kind of identified that almost all horror movies have, but this movie, you know what's funny? The Exorcist doesn't have. I don't think so. Maybe it does. Maybe I should have brought it up last time. But it's the horror lives on. A lot of movies have the horror lives on. What I've found is the horror lives on is often tacked on to a movie, even though that movie is arch plot. They'll put it on there anyway, even though it kind of turns it nihilistic. So like Nightmare on Elm Street,
Well, that's
the
business,
original,
though, right?
it's a business thing.
Yeah.
But there's something about it. I think the audience wants the horror to live on. Like they want to leave the theater saying, yeah, the horror lives on. Now this movie, I actually think the horror lives on is sort of thematic, because again, I'm a big believer that this one's nihilistic in some ways.
Right.
So I think this one actually,
you can't
it's kind
kill
of
evil,
warranted.
and he is evil, as Dr. Loomis says.
Yep. No, not to retreat back to The Exorcist. I don't think The Exorcist had a horror. I think they vanquished it, and they were happy, and they were going to leave. I mean, even though we know Satan's still out there and stuff like that, it didn't feel like they were going to be affected by it or anything, or it was going to be bad for the people.
It didn't end like Thriller with someone, or like somebody looking at the camera like with eyes.
No.
Yeah. Like
we didn't see an ethereal thing come out of him when he's giving him the last
right.
Yeah,
that would almost have been laughable at this point. Yeah.
I'm gonna go back and just edit that scene.
A crappy digital zoom into the face. Yeah.
Like that smile. Yeah.
You want to talk about Laurie Strode?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I debated how much to go into this, because the final quote unquote the final girl topic is its own beast that we're not really here to talk about.
That's a whole podcast within itself.
Yes, and
I feel like our best episode for that was Nightmare on Elm Street. I feel like we really covered
Nancy
it.
was a good one, and we
Nancy
talked a
yeah.
lot about Sydney.
Sydney, yeah, we
through
did.
that lens and her, her sexual autonomy and all of that stuff. This one, though, the reason that I bring up some of her, some of the standard screenwriting construction stuff we've talked about in the past is because, to all those things we said about how unconventional this script is compared to like your standard Hollywood cheeseburger, I wanted to see how it tracks, how it executes just her character. Does it do all of these things that we find with your main character in a standard Hollywood cheeseburger, despite how unconventional it is? And so I went ahead and I put some of the 3 things that we normally put up when we're breaking down our characters. So the first one is Laurie's things that need fixing. So here's my book report section. I got a bunch of stuff. And feel free to chime in. So this comes from Blake Snyder. Bingo again. From the first Save the Cat, which is standard Hollywood cheeseburger movies. They typically, in the setup portion of Act 1, will set their character up with 5 or 6 things that need fixing, that then we watch them overcome as the story unfolds. Or if it's a tragedy, we watch it go backwards. These things are great, and by the end, they're terrible. And I wanted to see if this one did it. So what's immediately stuck out is all the things that I'm going to list. They weren't in the setup. We sort of learned new things that needed fixing about her personal life as the story unfolded. Like, some of these things weren't introduced until like the midpoint of the script. But, for her, they still create conflict while we're waiting for her to understand that there's a killer to be feared, right? And the things that are in her world, they're horrible things. But okay, these come in 6 categories. So number 1, changes in attractiveness and personality. She's definitely shy to a fault, right? She says, early on when they're walking, and as Jamie said, the movie plays that conversation like it's not really important. She does say, like, as usual, I have nothing to do tonight, while they're talking about what they're going to do with their boyfriends. And then they give her shit for being shy, and we can tell she's shy, right? The
performance is totally that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
she's afraid to talk to guys she's interested. The movie goes above and beyond to show us that. So that's definitely a thing that needs fixing, right? And your standard one.
She's even meek with her friends.
She is. She doesn't speak up for herself. She doesn't advocate for herself. You're right. False beliefs. This one's kind of in the midway, but she definitely says there's no such thing as the boogeyman, right? That is a big time major false belief that needs fixing in order for her to get through this movie. So I think it tracks, right? Another one. Number 3, strained personal relationships. I don't think this one checks the boxes.
No, not really.
No, I don't think
her friends are like kind of do stuff on her behalf without asking.
Yeah, but they're not strained.
Like playful.
So that one's a no. It's not on here. This one is definitely the opposite of this, which I found was interesting. She doesn't need fixing. It's the not being entrusted with the responsibility or not being able to handle responsibility. She's the most responsible person in the movie, right? So unlike most Hollywood cheeseburger movies that we watch, this is the opposite of that. So I found that to be very interesting and instructive, makes it unique. Number 5, being invisible to key people or seeking invisibility. She's definitely invisible to teenage boys, right? She said, her friend says, poor Laurie, scared another one away. It's tragic. You never have anyone to go out with. And she says, guys think I'm too smart, which I love, by the way.
She's so invisible that the policeman walks into her.
Yeah, walks in. Right.
Yeah.
So that one's definitely you know, another one for your standard, just like your standard Hollywood cheeseburger main character. Others don't believe in you, or you've given up on yourself. This is kind of, there's a bunch in here. Her friends are infantilizing her. She says, "What are you going to wear to the dance?" And her friend says, "I didn't know you thought about things like that, Lori." And then friends gaslight her paranoia, right? "You're losing it, Lori. You're crazy." And then she gaslights herself, so she's given up on herself. She's
Right.
sitting in her house like, "Just calm down. There's nothing to be afraid of." So it's definitely, so it has 5 out of the 6 things that need fixing. It just sort of drips them in over the course of the story rather than front loading them in the setup. And I think that
Right.
that speaks to the mini plot execution. That's why, but it still has them. So the second one I wanted to do was her.
I was going to say real quick, she's also innocent.
Yeah.
And her innocence, she's not awakened to the horrors of the world yet.
Innocent to a fault. Yeah.
To a fault.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, to a fault.
Yeah.
And the movie definitely changes that.
Definitely.
The ending with her crying is...
Yes,
That's
her
the end game
innocent.
of that,
Yes, her innocent.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the second one I wanted to do, more Jamie Nash quoting. This is all about the Jamie Nash quotes today. I'm just bowing to the altar of Jamie Nash.
That's right. I need a top.
I'm taking a stand against Jamie Nash.
That's right.
I'm just here to be a fanboy on my own podcast.
I need to remember these quotes.
I was gonna say, does Jamie know what you're saying?
No, I'm like, who is this guy? I'm gonna meet this guy.
Okay, so this is the rooting resume from Save the Cat Writes for TV. Jamie, do you want to kind of set this up, and then I'll go through them all?
Sure thing. In Save the Cat Writes for TV, I kind of expanded. Save the Cat, of course, is this notion. It's this idea that you could be a jerk, but if you save one little kitty cat, then you're worth rooting for. So you could have a character that's horrible. He's a mob boss, but he saves a cat and such.
Tony Soprano loves his ducks.
Tony Soprano loves his ducks, exactly.
Right.
And
it's true.
In TV and even in film, I mean, this honestly, if I rewrote Save the Cat, the original book, I'd put rooting resume in there too, because I think it's worthwhile. But rooting resume is basically the idea that there's more than just saving a cat. There's many different things, from sense of humor to being underdogs to having the world treat you unfairly. There's so many more reasons why we root for people that it's this kind of buildup. It's stacking of several different ideas and tools and things like that in the first usually 10 pages of a story or 10 minutes of a movie or TV show that cause us to root for people. And that's in the
Watch
rooting
any
resume.
Bill Murray movie, right?
Yeah. And the best, I still use it. Jimmy did a book report for the Joker episode. And I still think that's the best one because that character is so unlikable.
Right.
But they spend almost like how I just rattled off the red flags for this one. That one, it just is a constant stream of rooting resume check marks.
Yeah, we found 19 of them in the first 15 minutes of Joker.
Yeah.
So we just like,
it's my favorite to use when I talk about this and stuff like that, because there's just so many of them. But anyway, that's awesome. Resume.
Yeah. So my favorite thing about this technique, when you're coming up with characters, and I have since used this in my own work. You know, I've gone back to this and been like, what am I missing? What can I add? Just like you talked about the scare pass, Jamie, I've definitely done a rooting resume pass when setting up my character. And finding organic ways to make this feel authentic to the character that you're writing, that like fit your premise and everything. But my favorite thing about this activity is how we found characters where you can invert maybe one of them or two of them, and with villains you can invert all of them, and it sort of has the same effect for why we're compelled by the villains, you know. And some of the best like lead characters have inverted some of these things, right? Like your Tony Soprano. Like Tony Soprano may have half of these on the positive and half of these on the inverted side, right? Which makes him a very interesting, compelling, complex character. So, But Lori, the main reason I want to put this in is because, again, we just talked about how this isn't your standard Hollywood movie. And I wanted to see if Lori still has this rooting resume, right? What makes her such an interesting character, even though most of the movie she's not worried, she's not in survival mode. So here we go. There you have this broken down into 8 different sections, and within those sections you have 4, 5, 6 different bullet points that are sort of an extension of those, examples of those. So section number 1, they're underdogs. She checks, in my opinion, 2 of those boxes. They're Rodney Dangerfields. They get no respect, right? We just talked about that. Oh, poor Lori. You know,
her friends and boys don't respect her.
Exactly. They're rookies trying to play in the big leagues. And I think once she kicks into survival mode, that's definitely tracks, right? Like she's right. She's
it's
innocent.
David versus Goliath.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Number 2, they care about someone or something, a kid, a significant other, a grandma, a friend. I mean, boom. Cares about the kids. Number 3, they try very hard to make their lives better. Once she kicks into survival mode, they fall flat on their face, but they get up and try again and again. That definitely.
You could argue before that, maybe not.
Right.
You could argue before that.
So this is a late breaking rooting resume, right? It's like, oh, they just keep piling on, making her cooler.
Like she was letting her life pass by before
the whole movie.
Cosmic shift in her life.
Yes, she wasn't. She was passive
to
those things. That's a good point. So maybe it was inverted for most of that, and that makes her interesting. Okay, number 4, they're fun. And Jamie has a couple here that I think she fits. Sweetness. She's totally sweet, like wholesome. And adorkable. She's definitely adorkable. Like she's bringing the pumpkin for them. You know, what's the pumpkin for? It's for Tommy.
She lets them watch horror movies.
She's reading them stories.
She wants them to have a nice Halloween.
Yes. So that checks too. So far, all 4. Number 5, we know their struggle. And you have one here. She doesn't have a secret pain. She doesn't have a painful past. She's not in mourning. But Jamie, you have one here. They confess their flaws. She acknowledges that she's bad, you know, at talking to boys, and that she has no social life, and that
she's self-aware.
She's self-aware
right?
of those things. Yes, that's a good way to put it. Number 6. This section, you have like a million bullet points, and she checks them all, man. We wish we were more like them. Self-sacrificing, generous, resourceful, loyal, smartest person in the room, overcoming their fears, never giving up, cutting through the BS. She definitely, like, even in the early goings when she gets that call after she sees Michael out in the sheets, at the drying the sheets,
right.
She gets that call. She cuts through the BS right away. Who is this? You know, like she checks all those boxes for me. Number 7, they're just like us. They share common mundane problems. They live mundane lives. Definitely. She's just like average American teenager, right? And number 8, this is my favorite one. See what you guys think. They're the best at something. What do you think?
She's the most responsible.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a thing.
I think she's the best babysitter, man. She's like,
the most responsible, the best babysitter.
She's carving pumpkins with them. She's letting them watch
that's
movies.
Fine.
She's reading stories to them. She's
it also helps the movie was originally called The Babysitter Murders, right?
Yeah.
And it's like she's the most responsible babysitter.
Exactly.
She's the best.
She's the best. So, Jamie.
She's the best there is at what they do.
Not all Wolverine. 8 of your categories on Reading Resume, even though it's not your standard Hollywood cheeseburger, Laurie Strode checks all those categories. So that sort of speaks to why she's so great. You know, it's not just Jamie Lee Curtis is fantastic in it, but it's in the writing. Yeah.
And I think one way, one instructional thing, if you ever get the note, which is very common, about characters not being likable enough or something, pick up the Reading Resume and just go punch up your first 10 pages and see if you can twist things around to hit as many of those as possible. And it can really help solve a note that commonly happens.
It's really less like you said about the Joker. It's less about liking them and more about understanding and connecting with their problems.
Make them human.
Yeah.
Humans sympathize and relate to humans.
Yes, like we don't we don't like Joaquin Phoenix, but we understand his problems and why he is the way he is, and why.
A lot of times when you get that note, it's not even that you think of your characters in a different way. It's just you're not showing it in the first 10 pages.
You know,
you just have it. Yeah, because if you ask the writer, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, they do this, this, and this." It's not being conveyed,
and it's why the note can be confusing sometimes, and you can just be like, "Well, I don't understand why my character is just like this other character."
Yeah,
but it's just that you haven't stacked all these little check marks. You haven't filled out the resume, or your resume only has one thing. It has a save the cat moment or something, but you need a whole bunch to kind of
have them save a lot of cats.
Yes. One thing about the character arc that I will say, there's some
this is exciting.
Yeah, there's some horror movies that I think are more simple. They're almost more just rite of passages. And this goes back. So Sam Raimi's birthday was yesterday. I think he turned 64.
Happy birthday, King.
He has a classic 3 crucial rules of horror, and they almost feel tongue in cheek because if you ever watch them on YouTube
from him, nah.
Yeah, it's just like they're hard to take too seriously in some ways. So he's like, number 1, the innocent must suffer. Number 2, the guilty must be punished. And number 3, and this is the one I think actually does apply sometimes in movies like this, but the hero must taste blood to be a man. That's his 3rd one. And I think what he's based, I think that one is one you find in a lot of, especially the older horror movies, where they're almost just rite of passages, where they were a child before the movie, they tasted blood, now they're an adult. And I think that's what this movie is to me. They were a teenager, they were a kid, they were a babysitter, but after this movie, they're an adult. They've grown up. And I think that's how Halloween sort of works for me. Yeah,
I think it's loss of innocence.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So I just want to use a couple quotes here that I pulled from the source. Well, one from John Carpenter, and then I'll go from there. So in response to those criticisms that you were saying, Bob, that people were shooting at them, I'd love to. And shame on me for not looking up like more about what Debra Hill has to say about this, especially as a woman.
I only found like 2 instances of this, and it's more my assumption they were responding to that.
Gotcha.
I didn't see anyone accusing that.
Okay.
But like, it's my assumption that they were trying to defend, because they're both not in that mindset of like, we were trying to scorn women for having sex. They were not trying to do that.
And it's written by a woman, so
Debra Hill was not doing that.
Yeah.
John Carpenter seems to me the type that if we said any theme or something, he'd be like, "That's bullshit."
Bullshit.
Yeah. I was just trying to scare people or whatever.
No, but
just make your movie and shut up.
You know, think about Debra Hill in 1970, probably 5 writing this. Or before, who knows how long ago they wrote it before they actually started pre-production and all that stuff. You know, being a woman in Hollywood in the early 70s and trying to be a producer, and she must have had a lot of fuel for the fire. You know what I'm saying? So I'd love to hear what she says on this, but this is pulling from Carol Clover's Men, Women in Chainsaw. She's quoting John Carpenter about this topic, which is, he says, "The one girl who is sexually uptight keeps stabbing this guy with a long knife. She's the most sexually frustrated character, and she's the one that kills him. Not because she's a virgin, because all that repressed energy comes out. She uses all those phallic symbols on the guy. She and the killer have a link, sexual repression," which is like very interesting. Doesn't speak to the arc, but I think it's on the subject. And Carol Clover has sort of a general, because Carol Clover coined the term final girl with Laurie Strode as sort of the template and the first one, even though Black Christmas was a few years before and does a lot of the same stuff. Like Black Christmas has the monster point of view, and the breathing. Black Christmas has the creepy phone calls. Black Christmas has the appearing and disappearing. Black Christmas has the whole final girl thing, very similar to Laurie Strode. I think Jess is the name of the character in that movie. But anyway, Carol Clover sort of says this about the final girl template. The unhealthy control of one's parents, which doesn't really track in this movie, must be disabled and killed in the service of sexual autonomy. When the final girl stands at the last in the light of day with the knife in her hand, she has delivered herself into the adult world. So there you go, child to adult. That's very much this movie.
Although
definitely
the triumphant aspect of that statement does not fit here.
Not fit
as
here.
much.
No. She's not in triumph. She's
an adult in a real world way.
Yeah,
as in crying, realizing there's no hope.
Yeah, there's no hope. It's nihilistic. Everything is terrible.
That's how it really is.
Yes. So anyway, I kind of wanted to pull those extra quotes on top of the fact that we all agree that this is child to adult. Innocence lost, definitely.
Yeah. She's not the same person.
And
if there was a compliment to be made to 2018, I think it builds off of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
if I definitely. I can't remember what we said in that episode, but
we were not a fan of how the movie portrayed victimhood. Basically,
that's my biggest problem with it.
The movie was saying, "Hey, be scared and
make for 40 years
and hole up in your house for 40 years, and you'll win the day."
But Michael actually won because he ruined her entire life. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Anyway,
let's not talk about it. Let's talk about Mike Myers.
All right,
Michael Myers.
All right,
not Mike Myers.
I wanted to go through this because this is something I give it. So, I get your bingo cards out. I read amateur scripts 5 days a week, and one of the most common ones I read are serial killer or monster movies, and their monster movies are serial killer movies from people who are just starting out writing and haven't really learned these techniques. So their monsters are usually very generic. Their killers are usually very generic. And so I've created this questionnaire that we've used a couple times in the show. My favorite one is Candyman that we use this for. That if you take the time to answer these questions, you're going to get a more well-rounded, memorable, specific monster or killer that's going to enhance your script. And you just organically, it's going to make it better and inspire lots of other ideas. So often one of the first things I do when I get a monster script, if it's loose and light on the monster, is give them this questionnaire, and a lot of times they may have the answers to this, they are just not conveying these things on the page. And so once they pop that back in, it's a way to be like, oh, I'm not fully playing with the whiteboard of my monster,
right?
So anyway, I wanted to kind of dig in and see why Michael Myers is so memorable, to the point that it's 40 years later they're still making monster movies about this very simple monster. Okay, so the first question I have, and some of these sort of are like Jamie's Dread Flags, they're just through a different lens. So he's sort of talked about some of them. So the first, and Bob, you can bounce in and off the cuff off of this too.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's just not me reading.
Okay.
The first question I have is what created your killer or your monster? What's their motivation, backstory, mythology? So
I mean, that's where the nihilism comes in, is we'll never know. He's almost like Lovecraftian or something. He's unknowable evil. He is.
Yeah, and right, but also on Halloween night is where it cemented this thing with Haddonfield, right? His sister left him unattended and had sex with her boyfriend, and he killed her, and then he got locked in an asylum. All he wanted to do, according to a psychiatrist, is get out and go back to Haddonfield and punish
women again.
More people who are doing the same thing.
Right. So he just wants. He's like a locomotive. He wants to just keep doing the same thing constantly.
Yes.
Kill innocent young women
on Halloween.
On Halloween.
It's very specific.
Okay, I got you.
And number two, this is an interesting one too for Michael. The monster's modus operandi. Talked about this in The Silence of the Lambs, how specific that was, right? It informs all the kills. What are their weapons and tactics of choice? These can be physical or psychological. Are they a crimes of opportunity killer, or do they have one specific kill tactic that they do in a variety of ways? Or are they a mix of both? And I think Michael's the crimes of opportunity guy, right? He just he attacked the nurse to steal the car
when you're vulnerable.
Yeah, killed the mechanic to get his clothes. he wore a sheet to trick the one victim and get her. He used a rake to lock Lori in. He punches through a door to unlock it. He's like a crimes of, but he does have some other modus operandi, as Jamie talked about in his Red Flags, which is he's always stalks his prey slowly and then disappears. Right? That's his MO. Right? Michael's there, he's gone. Michael's there, he's gone. And then I would say that he does target sister surrogates who are having sex instead of being responsible. But maybe that's just me.
He also favors a knife.
Right. That's what I was going to get. I'm going to get into that. Yeah. But that's true. The monster's personality or lack thereof. Is your monster silent but deadly, or do they have a vocalized personality? Because you can think of it. Yeah. But you know what? Loomis says he hasn't spoken a word in 15 years. There you go. Right from the source, the guy who's been studying him. But also, I think he does have a little playfulness, right? He's got a bit of gallows humor. Like, he displays.
I mean, the ghost is
is funny, right? And
ghost costume,
then he has theatricality, right? He totally sets up those bodies like a haunted house.
He's playing with his food. I mean, he's not a he's not a moron.
Yeah.
He knows Lori can see him when he's hiding in the bush.
Right.
He knows that she can see him from the window. He's playing with her.
He is doing that. Yeah, and that, especially that last, when she finds all the bodies, like, they're all set up like a haunted house ride, right? You go, one falls from the ceiling. Like, he didn't have to put her there. And then you go on the bed, there's the tombstone of his sister that he killed. Like, she's just sprayed out. There's candles. There's a jack-o'-lantern. It's fucking theatrical, right? So he's got some personality. It reminded me watching it when we talked about even though we didn't do an episode on The Terminator, which I really want to now. We did it on Terminator 2, but in James Cameron, it's had it when he, in the first one, when the Terminator is repairing his eye, he's in the motel room and somebody knocks on the door, and the computer gives him 3 responses to say, and it's one that says "go away," and then number 2 says "fuck you," and he chooses number 3, "fuck you, asshole," because he's got a personality. Right? That gives a personality, and this whole thing with the theatricality of his kills reminded me of the Terminator choosing "fuck you, asshole" as opposed to "go away." But this is a good question. If your killer has a voice,
the fact that he even wears a mask is a personality,
right?
Choice, right?
It was just yeah.
He's not doing it because of the police. He's just doing it.
Yeah. But if they don't have a voice, how else do they express themselves? And he's clearly this is showing that he has. That's what makes him memorable, right? And the movies do that again and again. This is just like one long premise pretzel. This franchise of that,
right.
And the next question. This is where I decided I wasn't going to do action figures for the rest of them. It's just for Michael. I challenged my clients to do an action figure exercise for their monster, because often visually I can barely picture what they look like. for it's the monster movie. They need to be memorable. Okay, so the monster's unique physical appearance. Usually it's exaggerated features. So how would you describe Michael's physical appearance? Not his costume, his physical appearance. He's got messy hair.
He's good. He's slender.
Yeah.
But big.
He's imposing. Yeah.
He's imposing.
Yeah. You would write that on the page, right?
Right.
Monster costume. What is their signature? What's their Halloween costume, right? What's their signature costume? It's a fucking mechanic.
It's a mechanic, yeah.
Very simple. And this is what's interesting. Like, in the script, they never describe that, but they do describe this in the script, which is from the script. It says he wears a Halloween mask made of rubber with the grotesque features of a man. So that's in the script, right? A ghost white male Halloween mask. Right. I think that's very they did that.
What's scarier than William Shatner?
But it's also premise specific, right? Like, you have
right.
this killer in a movie called Halloween. He's wearing a Halloween mask. I mean, that's so specific. And then monster accessories, not just any knife. A carving knife, like the one you use to carve jack-o'-lanterns.
Right.
Yes, very specific. So if your monster has a thing, an object, how can you make it as specific as possible to your concept, right? And then also in the fright rags action figure that I sent you guys, it includes the Judith Myers headstone, right? If you're asking yourself, like, if you're starting from scratch and you got a monster and you're like, what accessories would be in my box, coming up with those ideas of what's a cool accessory that would come in my monster box, it also will inspire ideas for scenes and moments, like this next one, do they have any scars, birthmarks, or tattoos? And that doesn't necessarily have to be in the front when you meet him. It might be throughout the story, and he gets his eyes gouged, he gets his neck stabbed, he gets bullet wounds. There's an alt variant of Michael Myers that has like an eye gouged and a neck wound, and a bullet holes in the mechanic coveralls. And then this is a funny one. Do they have any pull string quotes or catchphrases? He doesn't, but
the music,
but he has a signature sound, like all the great monsters, which is the breathing, right? And so he even checks that box, right? He's got a signature sound. And then Jamie, this is where my shark fins coincide with your dread flags. They're the same thing. I always try to up front challenge people to come up with your shark fins. What are your shark fins before you write the movie? So you just have this whiteboard full of shark fins that you can, I haven't used this shark fin. I haven't put up the yellow barrels in a while. I need some tension. The barrels, he's right there. The shark's right there. So, famous examples that we've talked about in the past of this. So the predator rattle, right? Your signature sound. The objects vibrating in Jurassic Park. The music slowing and objects falling from the sky in Nope. And to your point, Jamie, I think what this movie does best in support of your dread flags is those shark fins. They do so many of them. The stolen station wagon, every time that comes up, that's a shark fin for Michael. The old abandoned Myers house, every single time it's mentioned or seen, you think and feel Michael might be near. Discovering Michael's path of destruction, like you said, Jamie, Michael's been here. Every single time something is discovered from his path of destruction, we as an audience are feeling tension and dread that he might be right off screen. Dogs barking, mentions of the boogeyman. That's a big one. This movie starts mentioning the boogeyman early on, and so Michael might not be there on screen, but the boogeyman is being discussed, so we're fearing him and feeling dread, and that functions like a shark fin, right? It's exactly right. Shark fins, the boogeyman, and doors creaking open, right? They imbue that with meaning, because every time a door creaks open or there's an open window or an open door, we know that means Michael has been there, right? So even if there's an open,
you could even put the cinematography, as a shark fin for Michael, as we said earlier.
Man, but that's so all those things. It's like they literally were like, okay, how do we fill this 1 minute where Michael's not here and fill it with dread, like Jamie said, with the dread flags? Well, we got an endless list of shark fins that we've created, to pile on here. So, that's my monster questionnaire. That's, if anybody,
he's not just a dude in a jumpsuit.
That's what
There's
I'm saying.
So much more.
There's so much more to it. And to that point, I kind of wanted, since we heard Laurie's, kind of wanted to show just how much this plays with that same rooting resume for Michael Myers. So we did this, if anybody's interested, we did this Jamie's rooting resume for villains for the Gremlins. We did it for Lecter. We did it for Ghostface in the Scream episode. So let's do it for Michael Myers.
Right. No, I think it's
all right.
It works because he's usually thought of as a more simple
villain. So the point here is all those same things we pointed out that make us root for Laurie. You can invert those and make a compelling villain that we're interested in. We don't want them to win, but we're compelled by them. They're scary because of these. They play with these things. So number one, they're underdogs. Yeah, he's fucking driving. He's literally driving. He's in the driver's seat. Like, he is in control. He's the hunter. He's the lion in the bushes. You know,
He somehow moves at ungodly speeds.
yes,
and,
he's never the underdog.
Like, you know, I always thought about the scene with the bush. Like, he's running in that scene. There's no other way. We just aren't showing it, right?
Right.
But he's really fast.
Somehow.
He's super fast. Yeah.
So, number 2, this one's interesting. They care about someone or something, definitely, but for the wrong ways, for all wrong reasons, right? He has sister issues. Like Jamie says in one of these things, is an old neighborhood. Like, he definitely comes back to Haddonfield, but not for the right reasons. A cat, which they save. He kills dogs and eats them.
He kills dogs, yeah.
And eats them. Number 3. They try very hard to make their lives better. They have a dream or a plan. They fall.
He does have a plan.
He does, but it's a negative plan, right? It's a bad plan.
Yeah.
It's an evil plan. So it directly inverts that. Number 4, they're fun. They're funny. They have the gift of gab.
I mean, next, yeah, we got
charming personality. He's devoid of it. Yeah, he's devoid of personality. So number 5, we know their struggle, right? We don't know a goddamn thing.
You can't relate to him at all
about what's going on in his head. So that absence of knowing anything about what's going on in his head subverts this and makes him compelling.
Right.
Number 6, we wish we were more like them.
I wish I was as fast as him.
Yeah,
some people might.
Number 7, they're just like us.
Right, like anyone who has all these reverse, like anything in common with any of these is like should be in prison. Right? Like, right? Like,
that's what I love about this list, though. Like, you invert that, and all of a sudden you start making your villain, and you invert these things, and it really starts adding up to a really scary presence. Number 8, this one tracks. They're the best at something.
Yeah.
Definitely the best of something. So he gets that one.
Best
on the
at stabbing.
Yeah, the best at. So anyway, I love doing the villains. I call it the reverse rooting resume, where you take all of those and see if you can invert them and make some character, and that definitely works for Michael Myers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the last thing we got on our list is talking about Dr. Loomis and the praise of killer speech.
Jamie, how do you want to do this? Do you want to do your examples, or do you want me to do my examples and then you bounce off of it?
Oh, is this the half man?
Yeah, we got the half man. We're at the half man.
It really doesn't matter to me. So Jimmy and I were talking that we both have kind of half man models of different types of.
Can we give a little summary on what a half man is for new people?
So half man is, again, it's related to the monster in the house and Save the Cat. A half man's a common character that you see in a lot of monster in the houses. The idea is it's usually a mentor figure. The idea behind half man is it's somebody who's faced evil in some way and survived it, which is why it's called a half man, because maybe part of them has been ripped away or something. They have a hook for a hand, or they're literally half a person, or they have scars to show it. Quint in Jaws is a classic.
That's why it's named the half man.
Yeah,
literally. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, and I have a list of common types of half men that you see. I mean, I can go through mine real quick. They'll only take a second. So some of mine are number 1. I have spiritual guide. There's somebody like Father Marin in The Exorcist, or somebody like that. The tragic survivor could be another one. And this could be Laurie Strode in the later movies. Would kind of be the half man of those. The paranormal expert or the monster hunter.
Poltergeist, the old lady.
Exactly. That even though she might fall, I think I have a psychic one as well.
Oh, okay.
So this one,
she might do both, though.
Yeah. This one could even be Monster Hunter. Could even be Quint in some ways.
Yeah.
Fake experts. these are usually ones like in Fright Night. You know, Fright Night was a good example of this. Or, or maybe the Frog Brothers to an extent. You know,
That's great.
What about Ghost?
I
Whoopi
love
Goldberg.
that.
yeah,
I love that.
yeah.
Fake expert.
These are usually some of my favorite half men, to be honest. The ones that really pretend they're kind of fakers in some ways. Dr. Know-It-All, which is what I include Loomis as. They're knowledgeable expert who provides scientific explanations for the supernatural or something. Even though he kind of believes in evil,
like Jason Isaacs in Armageddon.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Bob Thornton or something, like one of those characters.
Exactly. The psychic, again, that's where I put the poltergeist character. The law enforcement officer, maybe that's dealt with a similar thing or the exact person before. Again, in the later Halloween series, we see those kind of characters. The occultist, somebody who practices magic, or something that relates to it. The monster Stan, sometimes there's a big fan of the monster. Yeah, the fanboy.
Didn't you used to call him the hype man or the hype woman? Yeah.
Could be. The monster Stan I also have is like, it's funny because sometimes they're the assistant and stuff too, as well. So they can be all.
Would that be like the dude in The Menu who worships the chef?
Yeah, that could be because they kind of give you insight.
He knows everything about him, and he worships him.
Yeah. And then and they're the basic ones they have, and then sometimes there's also like ghostly spirit or something like that. They're kind of like the murdered victim who's the spirit that wants revenge.
Right.
Like you might get in like a movie like Lady in White, which is one of my favorites, or The Devil's Backbone. You know, there's some kind of ghostly spirit that kind of helping out. So they're the ones I came up with. They're just ones when you're thinking of half men. These are the types of characters you might often see.
Yeah, I find saying that, Jamie, to people, just giving it basic is not enough. Just being like, oh, it's the character who knows about the monster experts there. It's not enough. So you have to go more into detail to get people to the answers they're looking for.
They still need to be a character.
Yeah. So yours goes the extra mile on like the tropeness of it. Mine,
I think the key with Hitman is like, what's their purpose?
Yes. And so my list is I have a list that I'll go down that's on my questionnaire that I give my clients who, again, just like with the monster, they don't really have. What they do is they a lot. Look, I'll just be honest. A lot of the people that write scripts, that send me scripts, who write a horror script, are not horror fans, and they want just a horror script in their portfolio, or they just don't have. They haven't done, like, I always say this, like, research leads to authenticity, right? So we talk about not write what you know what you write. So in that case, if you're writing a movie about a succubus, you need to become a succubus expert yourself. You need to become the succubus expert.
Oh, I am.
Yeah. I am. So, like, if I read your succubus script and I'm like, I know as much about succubus now by the end of this movie as I did before I started, you're not giving me anything fresh, anything unique, anything interesting. One way to find the freshness is to figure out your half man, right? Your half woman. Who's your monster expert, and how can you play with that character and give us the freshness and the authenticity and make it feel like you know what you write, even if what you're writing about is supernatural and it doesn't really exist, right? It only exists in literature and movies before this. So what I find, this
stuff also exists in other genres too.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Like you can watch Drax is kind of a half man of Thanos,
totally.
right?
I mean,
like, you know what I mean?
What's his name in Brides in The Wedding Crashers? The Will Ferrell is a half man,
like Wedding
comedy.
Crashing, right?
Like these, they exist in other forms. And so anyway, what I find, the reason that you need to make the list that Jamie just made, the reason that you need to go the extra mile when you're digging in and figuring out who is your half man, who is your half woman, is because these writers aren't playing with this at all, right? They just have one character will like look something up in a book, another character will like, see something on YouTube, you don't have this one character who performs that function for the audience and for the other characters in the story to do that, right? And so so my questionnaire is more like function, Jamie. So I look at it more from like, are they on the theme team? Are they teaching the character and the audience the theme? Or are they an evildoer and they're representing the sin? They're representing the societal ill. And that's how I first say, are they on, which side are they on, first of all? And then they usually come in, these are how I codify them. Is your monster, and I just call them monster experts instead of half men, half women. Is your monster expert a member of the theme team? Do they know the thematic lesson the others need to learn? Right? Like Loomis is a member of the theme team. Yes, he respects the evil. Are they a monster hermit, a survivor of a past monster encounter, refusing to help fight the others based on what they've learned about the monster, right? Don't talk to me about this monster. I'm not going to help you because I know the thematic lesson. Are they a monster historian? Somebody with extensive knowledge of the monster, like Indiana Jones is a monster expert of the Grail, right? Even though it's not horror, he's a monster historian, but he's never seen the monster for himself. He could tell you everything about the Grail you ever wanted to know that humans know, but he has not had any encounter with the monster. So I call that character a monster historian. And he may know the lesson, or he could be on the opposite side and be completely, Belloc, Belloc is also a monster historian, but he's on the wrong side of the theme. Are they a monster hunter? I mean, this is your classic, right? A survivor of past monster encounters who are helping others fight the monster based on what they've learned in the past. Or are they a monster prisoner? A character who is imprisoned physically or psychologically by the monster. Sometimes it's both, like in a possession type of story, where the character briefly takes back control of their body and their mind to warn others with the monster is in them, and they're warning others about the monster, so they're a monster prisoner. What were you going to say, Bob?
I was going to say a weird example before you went to possession of this would be Jumanji.
Oh, that's a great example.
Yeah.
That's a great pull.
the original Jumanji.
Yeah,
Rob Morgan.
I know what you're saying. Yeah. And then there's the other side. Or is your monster expert an evildoer? Are they committing the sin that created the monster? Right? Are they a monster helper like Renfield, right? Or like in Halloween 2018, the psychiatrist, whatever his name. Or in spoiler alert, the new Candyman, the guy who's, in the neighborhood who's talking about Candyman turns out to be the monster helper. Or are they a monster?
Blade 2.
Blade 2. That's a great example.
Right. Scud.
Yes. Yeah. Are they a monster mimic? A survivor of a past monster attack whose trauma with the monster turned them into a monster themselves. So those are my codifications: monster helpers, monster hermits, monster historians, monster hunters, monster mimics, and monster prisoners. All of those can do completely different things, and choosing which one of those really,
you can mash them up.
Yeah, or you can mash them. Yeah, exactly. So not really as detailed as Jamie's as far as like what they do, but their function in the story. So anyway,
it's interesting because I have another part that I talk about. I just say, what's the purpose of a monster, divorced from the types of monster hunters, and it has a lot of similarities. There's one, like, it's teach theme, give advice on how to kill it or how to survive it, or or what its talisman is or its weakness is. Hyping the monster,
hype man.
Yeah, hype man. Give backstory, so like your historian. But the one additional one that I found happens in a lot of movies, not in this one. Now in the 2018 one it is, and it's the antagonistic. So they have a secret purpose, and they're using the heroes in some ways in service.
Yes.
You see that a lot, like Alien and stuff like that. There's a bunch of movies that have
Yeah, Ash is a great Ash in Alien, not Ash in Evil Dead. Ash is a great example. He's there for the company. Yeah,
there's a lot of ones that are kind of Trojan horse kind of trouble in some ways. They have a secret purpose, but they're the common ones I see. And I think Loomis in this one is mainly there to hype, for the most part.
God, using that word is so weird.
Yeah.
He's hype man.
For the audience, that's the function.
Yeah. I get it. It's just funny. It's so funny.
He's definitely that's a new T-shirt. Hype the killer or something.
Yeah, right.
And,
get hype. It says get hype and it's
right. And then and give backstory or exposition. So he's like your true kind of mentor. I'm an exposition device. Yeah.
On that topic. I think this is the 43rd horror episode we've done. There is a Robert McKee. I learned this in is the praise of the killer speech. I learned this in a Robert McKee horror seminar. Like 25 years ago. That's how old I am. And it's basically when someone basically vocalizes something, they are the hype man, right? Gravitas for your character. And we have pointed this out not just in horror. There's a great one in Men in Black about the bugs. There's the dysfunctions in there's a great one
Terminator 2.
So genre wise, it's in comedies. You can have a hype, you can have a praise of the villain about a comedic villain. It's when a person like talks about how notorious your villain is to make the audience more intrigued and more scared by them. And Loomis, this one's like maybe the best one, if Quint's Indianapolis monologue isn't the best one, this is. And
I'd lean Quint for me, but
okay,
this would be probably
a solid number 2. Where do you put then is Terminator, Kyle Reese in Terminator? You will not stop until you're dead.
Let's say they're just all in like the top 5 and sort of gelatinous blob.
And Ash, you don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? The perfect organism.
Right. I think the reason I like this one the most is because he keeps doing it over and over.
Every scene is not just one killer.
Because no one listens to the guy. No one listens to him.
Evil has come to your town.
I think if I had to criticize Dr. Loomis, it was like, dude, just say like an inmate is loose. You're saying evil. People are like, what are you talking about?
If I had to pitch like my take, how they recently said somebody's doing a Halloween cinematic universe? Like, I think the Loomis cinematic universe is the right way to go.
Yes.
People from the asylum.
Yeah, this way over the top monster hunter of a character. You know what I mean? Dealing with this stuff. Maybe that is what they're doing. I don't know.
Yeah.
But Bob, do you want to read it?
Yeah. This is Dr. Loomis's praise of the killer speech. Let me clear my throat. Yeah. I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left, no reason, no conscience, no understanding, and even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized what was living behind that boy's eyes was pure and simply evil.
Yeah, man.
There it is.
Yeah, man.
Sorry, I'm no Donald Pleasance.
No, yes, you are. That's why I asked you to read it, not me.
I'm not as sexy as Donald Pleasance. That's all.
No, but
that's what I meant.
If you're out there, you're writing you got a monster script, right?
Yeah.
You need to identify who is your half man, half woman, character. What is their function? And then you need to write at least one praise of the killer speech. Like if you don't have a praise of the killer speech, you need one. If you don't have a half man character,
let me say this too. If you don't have one, why wouldn't you want one?
Yeah.
They're like usually the most awesome part of a movie is somebody doing it. So
and just I can't tell you how many times I've read a script that's supposed to be about a specific type of monster, and I learned nothing new that I didn't already know from just like consuming literature and movies since I was born. And you need to make it so that when I watch a movie about this thing, I feel like everything is fresh. And the key, I think, to getting that freshness lies within choosing this monster expert, this half-man character. So yeah,
Totally.
everything
agree.
we learn about Michael is from him.
Yeah. I mean, because Michael's not saying it.
Yeah.
He's not saying, "Hey, I got soulless demon eyes."
Yeah. I mean, we get the prologue, but after that, yeah.
You need someone to verbalize it that isn't the person.
Yes.
Like, dude, I think there's other cases that aren't half men where that also applies.
Yes,
right? Like,
totally.
Yeah. You can't have characters just talking about themselves all the time. I think that brings us to the end of our outline
this is
too.
an epic outline.
Yeah, it's a big outline. With that, do you guys have anything else that you want to add, or do you have anything you want to plug? Anything?
I will say on my end, I have a couple slots left in 2023 for script butcher notes. And if one of you orders, whoever orders next will be my 400th order that I've been talking about, approaching 400. So whoever's next is the 400th script that I've done notes on. And so that's a lot of notes. It's like 40,000 pages of margin notes.
Did they get like a little piece of paper that said customer 4,000?
No,
400?
No.
Sorry.
But
okay.
So yeah, I've got a couple slots open left in 2023. So hit me up, scriptbutcher.com.
What? Jamie?
I don't think I have anything this week, so hit Jimmy up.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say. Be number 400. What are you doing? Write a script like really quick in a day and then send it to Jimmy. It's like a mess.
No, don't do that.
just to get in on the 400.
Fuck.
I'm kidding.
It'll be the one that ends it all.
Yeah. It's called the Half Man.
Oh, that'd be great. They're gonna have like every single one that Jamie and I both listed. That's all it's gonna be.
Jimmy's service should be called the Half Man.
You're a script half.
The shark has bitten me in half over the course of 7 years.
He survived script evil and now he gives notes on it. The Half Man.
It could work. All right. I think that's everything.
Yeah.
Thank you all for listening.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Happy Halloween.
Hey, this is Bob Rose, and thank you for listening to Writers Blockbusters. If you'd like to financially support the show, please consider joining my Patreon. I've been producing the podcast for several years completely out of pocket, and I'd like to keep producing it ad-free and no longer at a loss. If you'd like to help, head on over to patreon.com/Bob Rose Sucks. That's right, Bob Rose Sucks. And if you want the one and only Jimmy George to help polish up that writing project you're kind of struggling with, head on over to scriptbutcher.com. As a listener, you already know he's the best there is, scriptbutcher.com. You can also support the show by simply sharing it or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate both. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.